The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Glory to you, O Lord. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to share the inheritance with me." He replied to him, "Friend, who appointed me as your judge and arbitrator?" Then he said to the crowd, "Take care to guard against all greed, for though one may be rich, one's life does not consist of possessions." Then he told him a parable. There was a rich man whose land produced a bountiful harvest. He asked himself, "What should I do? For I do not have the space to store my harvest." And he said, "This is what I will do. I shall tear down my barns and build larger ones. There I shall store all my grain and other goods, and I shall say to myself, 'Now as for you, you have so many good things stored up for many years. Rest, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this night your life will be demanded of you, and the things you have prepared, to whom will they belong? Thus will it be for all who store up treasure for themselves, but are not rich in what matters to God.'" The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Lord Jesus Christ.
I can never hear or read this second reading from St. Paul's letter to the Colossians without thinking about an Anglican priest that I met up in Canada, Arctic Canada, the first time I was up there. So we're talking about 25 years ago. He had had a fairly long career already in the Arctic and also in the South. And at the time that I met him, he was back up in Iqaluit for what turned out to be, I think, maybe 4 or 5 years. Our times overlapped a little bit. I left before him. He stayed after I was gone. And in the course of getting to know him, I found out a little bit about his story. And he was a widower. And his wife had died during a time when the both of them were in Ottawa. He was working in a small parish, and she was basically working with him, as was pretty much the traditional routine, traditional pattern for the Anglican Church and the ministers, the priests within the Anglican Church. And therefore, to kind of get this going a little bit, you need to be aware that that is a little bit different from what we are used to. We expect husbands and wives to be pretty close, and a great deal of the lives of each of them are shared. A lot of it overlaps. A lot of it is known pretty well by the both of them. And you need to kind of up that several notches when you're dealing with an Anglican minister and his wife. The parish is small. The people, the number of parishioners is not great. Everybody knows everybody else. And both of them, husband and wife, are pretty much involved with the same people and the same organizations, and pretty much the routines of the week are pretty much the same for both. The overlap is not perfect, of course. Everybody has their own things that they do, but it is considerable. And therefore, it took him by surprise when, shortly after his wife died, there began a rather long parade of people whom he did not know, approaching him, wanting to talk to him about his wife. These were people whose faces he had not seen, whose names he did not know, whose voices were not at all familiar to him. He had not run into them in the normal course of their daily life, but nevertheless, they were coming up to him and talking to him about her, about how much she had meant to them, about what they had learned from her, about certain interactions and encounters that they had had, how she had affected their lives, in some cases had touched their lives very deeply. And he came away from that with a very clear connection with what Paul is talking about in today's first reading. You have died, and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. He would have sworn that he knew her very, very well, and that there couldn't have been a large platoon of people that he simply had no knowledge of, that nevertheless she was involved with. Nevertheless, that was exactly the case. They knew each other so very well, and yet so much of her life had been hidden with Christ in God. He didn't know about it until after she died, and he began getting these phone calls and these notes in the mail and people coming up to him in the stores as he continued with his own life in the town of Ottawa. That, I think, is partly what is going on in what Paul is saying. There is a certain mystery that attaches to each of us. Nobody is totally transparent to anybody else. You can know them oh so very well. You can have been with them since the beginning of their lives. You could be their very parents, and yet there is something about them that is hidden. You can share life with them at the most intimate level as husbands and wives do, and yet there is something that you will not know, perhaps many things that you will not know. There will be some things that you cannot see. There is a hidden quality to every single life. There's a great dicho, a great proverb that they say in Spanish, cada cabeza es un mundo. Every head is a world. And although we know some of what is going on inside that world of the heads of some of those people that are close to us, there is much terra incognita. There is much unknown land there that we have never seen. But I think what Paul is getting at here is something that, in addition to that, takes us a step farther, and that we find not isolating, but actually very encouraging and moving us towards solidarity. Paul is not just talking to one individual here, he is talking to the entire community of the church at Colossae, and that means he is talking to all of us as well. And he is, in a sense, giving us the key for understanding everybody else that is inside this building. He is giving us a key for understanding the truth, the innermost reality of every one of our fellow Christians. Look around, and I'm sure you will see many people that you know here, many people that you have known perhaps even for a very long time, faces that are familiar and life stories that are well known to you. And yet there will also be some people here that you do not recognize. Michigan City is a summer community in a lot of ways, and we have a lot of visitors that come here, strangers in some ways that we very much welcome and appreciate seeing. And yet there are going to be, and so therefore there are going to be some people here that we simply do not recognize, we have never seen before, and perhaps will never see again. And even with all of that strangeness and newness, in fact, we do know the inner reality of every single one of them. We know each other perhaps better than we are aware. As Paul says to each and every one of us, and as he says about each and every one of us, all of you were raised with Christ, and therefore you should be, and probably are, seeking what is above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Think of what is above, and not of what is on earth, for you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. The inner truth of all of us, the heart of the matter of every one of us, is that our life is hidden with Christ in God. The truth of all of us is that we have all died. We are very much walking around. We are still drawing breath. Our life in the body has not come to an end, and perhaps will not come to an end for a good long while. But in the very real and fundamental sense, our life is with Christ, and therefore his death is our death. His cross is ours, and his resurrection is also ours. The Paschal mystery of Jesus is not just something that belongs to him and only to him. He gives that to his disciples. He shares what he is and what he does with all of us. We are not simply spectators in a very interesting play of our redemption and salvation. We are participants. He invites us in. He makes us one with himself. He gives himself to us so that everything about him is now something that we have received, and it has reshaped and refashioned us according to the pattern of who he is and what he has done. His life has become our own. His death and resurrection, those are ours. His status as Son of God is also ours. In a different way, to be sure, Jesus is Son of God, Word of God from all eternity. In a few moments, we will say the Creed, and we will confess him to be consubstantial with the Father, of the same stuff, of the same nature as the Father, and of course, none of that is true of us. But nevertheless, because of the grace of Christ, who he is, his very identity and grace and being have been bestowed upon us and are gradually reshaping us according to himself. So that in a very real sense, as Paul says in another one of his letters, in a very real sense, all of us are sons and daughters of the living God. These are not just nice-sounding words that we use on occasion to make ourselves feel better. This is the truth, the literal truth of who we are. So that in the end, even though it happens in a very different way, in the end we are what Christ is. In the end, Christians are other Christs. His life has entered into ours, has taken possession of ours, and the very secret at the heart of our being is indeed that we have died with Christ, and that our real life is now hidden with him in God. And because of that, even though the person sitting next to us or in the next pew may be a complete and total stranger whom we will never see again, nevertheless, there is a true, authentic bond of solidarity that holds all of us together. Not because we have wanted it, not because we have fashioned it or designed it, not because we have made that decision on our own. It comes to us as pure gift. Because Jesus has given himself totally and completely to us, all of us belong to him and therefore also belong to each other. So that the unity that we celebrate when we come together to do the Eucharist is not just our unity with Christ, although it certainly begins there. This is also the sacrament of the unity of the Church, the reality that is at the heart of each of us and that is acting even now to bring us closer together, not just for the sake of being together, but so that we can be a more powerful force and a more powerful witness in the world in which we live. On the night before he died, Jesus made it very clear that he expected and wants and will give his disciples the gift of unity. He expects them to be one and to show that they are one by their love for each other. And he makes it very clear what the whole point of that is, not just so that they can feel better by being a part of a wonderful community. It is precisely so that the world will know that the Father sent him, so that the world will believe in him as Son of God. The gift of unity that each of us has, that is founded on the gift of Christ, has a purpose, and that purpose is a continuation of the mission of Jesus himself. He is sent into the world to be the salvation of the world, and that continues in his body, the Church, in the mission that we are involved in. So that all of us are sent into the world in order to proclaim the gospel and to be witnesses to Christ. And we do so primarily because of our love for each other, because of the solidarity that we share with each other, whose very foundation is laid out for us in what Paul tells us in today's second reading, taken from his 3rd chapter of the letter to the Colossians. All of us belong to each other because we belong to him. All of us have been raised with Christ and are seeking beyond what we normally see. All of us are now seated at the right hand of God with him. All of us have our lives hidden with Christ in God, and that is what makes us different from everybody else and what makes us like everybody else who shares that same gift.